Hey, and welcome back to another episode of the Everyday Joy podcast. I'm your host, Ash Owen, and I cannot wait to find moments of joy with you today. Why don't you get ready? Maybe you're going for a walk, maybe you're just sitting at home with a cup of tea. Whatever it is, let's find some moments of joy together.
God is a safe house for the battered, a sanctuary during bad times. The moment you arrive, you relax. You're never sorry you knocked. That's found in the Bible. Read it from Psalm chapter 9 and verse 10 from the Message.
Cam, welcome back to the Everyday Joy podcast. Good to have you here.
Oh, so good to be back, buddy.
Now,
had so much fun yesterday.
It was so good. Now, Cam, we kind of touched on yesterday that you are a bit of a fitness enthusiast. You recently ran your first marathon, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Tell me, give us like the 30-second overview of your experience because, look, I'm not going to lie, I don't think I will ever run a marathon. So I can live, and all of our listeners who also will never run a marathon can live vicariously through you.
It was as horrendous as you imagine it would have been.
You're not doing anything for the marathon case.
No, it didn't go to plan at all. The first half was great. The second half, just my body started letting me down. I was cramping. And mentally, that's the hardest part anyway, to just keep going.
When there's an injury.
But I had this thing, it started a long time ago. I wanted to run 42 Ks, which is a marathon if you're not familiar with it, 42.2 Ks, just before I turned 42. There was a sweet synchronicity about how that all came together.
Yeah.
Now, the event that I did was one day before my 42nd birthday. So there was no way I was not finishing that thing.
You had to get it done.
It took a little bit longer than I wanted, but I finished and my goal was achieved.
That's so good, Cam. And you got to run, it's like the Great Ocean Road, isn't it?
Great Ocean Road, yeah.
Well, we're looking at this verse from Psalm 9, verse 10. God is a safe house for the battered, a sanctuary during bad times. The moment you arrive, you relax. You're never sorry you knocked. Cam, the thing that is so cool about this verse, now I, in the last kind of year, have done like a deep dive into the Old Testament. So pretty much from like Samuel, Chronicles, Kings, all of those I just thought it was the coolest like few stories in the Bible ever. And what's so interesting about when you read the Psalms, once you know what David went through, you understand that like he's not writing this because he just had a bad day at work.
Right.
Like he's writing this because people were trying to kill him. His like best friend's like dad is like out here for him. Like all of these things aren't easy. Like he literally was having the worst time. The worst time. And so I think when you hear these verses and you understand the context of like, David's not writing this about, you know, just one little thing here or there. David is like lamenting about how difficult life could be, but yet his position is still, through it all, God is a safe house. Through it all, when I am broken and destroyed, God is there for me. And I think that it is so powerful to even just imagine like David in those moments, the fact that the words that he writes are like, once you arrive at this place with God, you can relax. And you're never sorry. But it's just so interesting when you know the context of it all.
It was actually so funny because my first thought was very similar to that. Just
so
going,
funny.
You know, you have to look, especially within the Bible, you got to look at the context, right? Because all the verses in and around it just help to give it so much more life and so much more understanding. So this isn't just, you know what? I had a really rough day at work. I had a conversation and somebody offended me. Or a meeting didn't quite go the way that I wanted to. Or, you know, maybe I stuffed up on the spreadsheet. And so, look, a sanctuary during bad times. You're
Which
right.
he is.
But it's just, this is even more extreme.
Correct.
This is where he's coming from as he's writing this, as you say. He's got people that are after his life. He is trying to hide. He is just, he is copping it on every single front. And yet in the middle of that, he finds that safety, he finds that assurance and that refuge, which to me is what really shines out about God's character through this verse, is the fact that he's that refuge, that it doesn't matter what storm is kind of brewing outside, whether it be something insanely massive or just our own version of insanely massive or just a little bit of a rough couple of days or a rough week or month or year. But regardless of what's happening on the external, that internal response can be to run to God as that refuge, as that safe house. But as the end part of that verse suggests, that you're never sorry that you knocked, there's actually an action
Completely.
that's associated with that. It's not just going to happen. You're actually going to have to do something to be able to enter that refuge.
Yeah.
And that's what I take away.
Yeah, I love that, Cam. I think that when I hear this, I know for me personally, I've gone through seasons of life where going to God as my sanctuary, as a place of rest, has been really easy. But I also know there's been times where, and this sounds harsh, but going to God has been the last thing that I've wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I think that whether you are on either side of the scale, whether you're in a season where like it is so easy to speak to God about things, it is so easy to see him as that, or whether he's the opposite, I think that it's such a great reminder to know that, like you said, it takes knocking, it takes seeking him. And it kind of makes me think of, I recently like shared at church this story that I went through where, you know, I went through all these like interesting theological, what would you even call it? I just really deeply struggled to know who I believe God to be. And I felt like I had to go from just believing what I'd grown up believing and actually take a grasp for it myself. And I remember sharing with my church recently, I was so confused. I felt so spread thin. I felt like every time someone tried to talk to me about God, I was like, I literally can't even talk to you about God because I don't know who God is anymore. Like, I was so confused. And I remember I was going to my church conference and I was waiting. I was like, this church conference, I'm going to go. Everything's going to make sense. Like, everything is going to be better. I just have to get to this finish line. Anyway, we get to this conference and I got like a words given to me by a pastor, and he basically said like, Ash, you're safe with Jesus.
Wow.
And I wrote in my journal, well, I don't feel safe, because I was so confused in my thoughts and my mind that I actually couldn't come to God because I didn't feel like he was that safe house. But what's so interesting and what I've learnt is being in that sanctuary isn't about coming into a place of perfection, right? I think so often
that's a really great point.
We think that to come to God as our safe house, to actually make coming into God's presence the thing that is, you know, removes that anxiety, gives us a place to relax. We have to have figured it out before we get there.
Yeah.
But actually what it's saying is it is a safe house for the battered.
Yes.
It is a safe house for those who are confused, who are lost, who are struggling, who are disappointed, who are frustrated, who don't understand. Like, this scripture shows us that like it's not about that perfection, that figuring it out. It's actually about going, God, I want you to be my sanctuary.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to knock whether I understand, whether I'm frustrated, whether I'm disappointed. I'm going to knock no matter what, because I know that you are the reason why I can rest.
And sometimes I feel that when it comes to a verse like this, especially if you're in the middle of some stuff that's real heavy, and it's been that way for a while.
That's rough.
Right? Then this is where God's that safe house for the battered. If this is something that you've just had a rough day, sure, it can feel like a rough day, but then everything's okay tomorrow. I mean, the picture that I get when I think about that word is that you've been repeatedly knocked down.
Yeah.
You've been repeatedly let down. You've repeatedly had those expectations unmet. That thing that you're praying for just hasn't happened yet. And yet you're just going, well, what am I supposed to do right now?
Yeah.
Like, God says, I am the safe house.
Yeah.
You can come to me. As you said, in that broken puddle of mess, without feeling like you've got to have everything together. Because I found this for myself, and this is a story that I've shared many times on air at The Light, was that for a number of years, my wife and I had an infertility journey.
Yeah, wow.
And so to be able to actually have this issue, we were trying to start a family and couldn't. There were a number of complications. And it's one of those issues that is all-consuming.
Yeah.
And it becomes all that you think about. It becomes all that you talk about. And to be honest, you get sick of praying about it.
Yeah.
And so it is all consuming. We would often sit down at the table and be just, okay, the number one rule for the dinner time conversation is we're not talking about this.
Yeah.
We had to set that particular boundary to be able to just go, we need to give ourselves that break. We need to give ourselves that mental release to just stop thinking about this, to stop talking about this. But the incredible thing about the character of God is that even though we never wanted to at times. I'm just going to be honest. We didn't want to bring it to God again.
Totally.
We were like, I'm sick about...
You're like, God, you know.
We've prayed this 1,000 times, and yet we still haven't seen that breakthrough. We're not on the other side. And, words had been spoken over us from people at church. We felt like we'd had our own words about having our own children and our own family. And so we were just trying with everything that we had to hold on. But we found that true comfort whenever we really surrendered it to God, when we walked into that safe house, is that refuge. Because we were battered. We were absolutely battered year after year of just hitting your head against a wall every single time. And it's just like, when is this going to happen? When is this roadblock going to be removed? When is this season that we feel like we've been promised finally going to arrive? Man, I mean, what else do you say?
Yeah. I think there'll be people listening today, whether it's similar and maybe it is a season of infertility, or maybe it's one of those seasons where you just, like you said, you just feel like you've been hit again and again and again, and you just don't know how to get up. I think that the other thing about this verse that I would love us to just touch on before we wrap up is, like, God, in those moments of being the sanctuary, can do a work. Yeah. I think so often we think that, like, it's like we just keep going and going and going, and then when God fixes it, then we rest.
Yeah.
But it's actually like God calls us to this place of rest in that season of being broken.
Because we've reached this point because we don't know what else to do.
Correct.
And so there really is nothing else that we can do.
Yeah.
It's at that point that God has to step in and intervene to be that miracle, to be able to provide that breakthrough. We've done all that we can. But if you're truly entering into that place of surrender, like you say, then it's like, God, I've done everything I can. Now it's over to you. It's such an incredible reminder of the promise that awaits on the other side.
Yeah.
Where once you do it, then it's that you're never sorry that you did.
Yeah.
You can often feel like, I'm coming to you with this again, God. I'm like, what is happening? But then the verse reminds us that saying, hey, you're never sorry. You're never sorry that you knocked. You're never sorry that you took that step. You prayed that prayer again to be able to seek God once again, to be able to enter into that safe place and that refuge. You're never sorry that you did.
I hope you enjoyed listening to today's episode, and if you did, why don't you go give us a 5-star written review. I cannot wait to dive even deeper into the Word of God with you tomorrow.